So, um, thank you, Mark, for doing this. It's way too early in the morning there, 7 a.m. You got your coffee, and I just had my second cup like an hour ago. So, yeah,
Yeah, thanks
good
for
morning.
having me, dude. Thank you. I've listened to many a podcast, but never actually been on one. So, yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, I like to think of this as helping people get their feet wet because most of my guests are just friends, but some of them have it's like startups or businesses going of their own and they don't have any experience. Like one of my floor mates at MKV, I don't know if you would remember him. Well, he was in mechanical, so maybe his name was Wakas. Do you remember Wakas?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a brown dude on the fourth floor. I just did a pod with
Yes,
him.
yes, I do remember him. Yeah.
So yeah, he's selling like fitness equipment online, and his he teamed up with his wife to provide other services like I think speech therapy. So I was just talking to him yesterday. His company's called Evo Health, and yeah, it's a brand new business for him. So yeah, it was cool to just get in right when he's got going and just to hear his ideas about that.
Yeah, it's always fascinating hearing that. I feel like it's such interesting times now because everyone is just off doing these different ventures just to kind of either pursue some latent passion that they've had for a while or even just to diversify things because the past year has been so nuts that everyone's kind of realizing that you got to have more than one kind of passion or source of income going on just to be steady and reliable and stuff like that. So yeah, people are definitely up to a bunch of different things these days.
Yeah, I just yeah, he started during the pandemic too. And yeah, I started this in July last year. Right now it's just for fun. There's no real income because I don't know. I feel like you got to put in years of work before you see any money, especially in the podcasting world because it's just taking off. Everyone has a podcast. Uh, One of my friends told me having a podcast nowadays is like 10 years ago, everyone had a band.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. But I mean, it seems like a good excuse to just talk to people and learn from their experience. And I debated starting a podcast. Actually, on many occasions, I've debated starting a podcast. I just don't know if like I would be an interesting enough person to be a host of one. But I churn through podcasts
Oh,
in
yeah.
my spare time and listen to so many because it's so fascinating. I've always been obsessed with hearing, especially like entrepreneurs and creatives and anyone who's like doing anything interesting. Really, it's always fascinating to hear their background and how they got started and their their reason for doing all of the different pursuits they're going for. So yeah, honestly, from a selfish reason, it seems like a pretty sweet deal on your end because you get to talk to
Yeah.
friends and other people who are doing some cool things and learn from them.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, we'll try this one out. You can watch it back, see how you feel. It's a good trial run if you want to uh, see how well you are at expressing your ideas, because that's what I do. After every episode, I watch it back and I make notes. And every time I'm upset that I use like at least 10 times, or I say or ah so many times, I have so many filler phrases. For example, I'll say things like, well, I mean, and then get to my point. So, yeah, it's definitely a good way to refine your speaking. So, yeah.
Yeah,
what do
take
you
some. Sorry, go ahead.
uh, what what are your top podcasts on rotation lately?
Uh, that's a good question. I mean, the podcast that got me into listening to podcasts is the Rich Roll podcast. Have you listened to that at all?
Uh, I have heard that, but I've never
So
like
it's
listened to it.
basically Rich Roll is he used to be uh, a lawyer, but like a really what's it called, like a white collar lawyer, and
Okay.
just like working, the classic like 80-hour weeks. But he was pretty much like a functional alcoholic, and
Mm.
his whole story is that when he was, I think he was in his 40s, or maybe it was right as he was turning 50 or something like that. He got sober and then got really into ultra endurance racing
Oh,
and became, he was either the first or the oldest to do, it's called the Big Five, and it's 5 Ironman races in 5 days across the 5 Hawaiian islands.
okay.
And so, anyways, he kind of converted himself in his life, and now he's kind of this fitness and just like overall wellness kind of thought leader, where he brings on people from authors to athletes to spiritual leaders, and he just has really good chats with them. He's a really good interviewer, and he touches on a ton of different topics. And so he's always good for just a different point of view, or something a little unexpected. And he usually, listening to his podcast results in a tangent of some kind where I'll spend like a week just looking into whatever he's talking about. He had
Yeah.
one guy on, what was his name? Anyways, he was this doctor who is now kind of like an environmental advocate talking about soil health. And I had no idea I would be so fascinated in someone talking literally about dirt, but
Yeah.
all of the all of the different aspects of soil health and how it leads to like certain health issues if we're putting herbicides and stuff in the ground. And it was just really fascinating. So it's those kind of tangents and just exposure to different ideas. So that was the main podcast that I started listening to. There's this other really good podcast called, what was it called? Oh, I gotta look it up. But it's essentially all about sound, and
Okay.
it's, let me find it. I'm totally blanking on the name. 20,000 Hertz, it's called. And it's essentially, yeah, it's all about sound and the different places that we hear. I don't even know how to explain it really. He'll basically take certain sounds, like for example the Netflix sound when you
Mhm.
log into Netflix, and it does that like and he'll give you the entire history of it, or
Oh.
he'll explain how they made all the different sounds for like Star Wars by like interviewing the original guy who went out to like his local park, and there was some wire connecting, like a guy line connecting a telephone pole to the ground, and he like hit it with a wrench and it made the blaster noise and stuff like that. It's really like geeky sound stuff. But
Yeah.
I've always kind of, as you know, I've always had a thing for sound and sound effects and all that stuff. So that's one I tend to geek out on. There's also more, there's better examples. It's not all like that nerdy. There's some like really mind blowing ones, like what is silence, and
Oh,
does
yeah.
silence exist? And he goes into like a crazy anechoic chamber, which you know dampens all the sound, and you can actually like hear your blood flowing through your system and
Whoa.
stuff like that. So really like trippy stuff like that too. That's another good one. And then yeah, I listen to some filmmaking podcasts as well. that tends to be the background learning for me. And for the most part, any podcast that interviews creatives or people
Mhm.
doing interesting things, because like I said, I love to just hear their inspirations and try and take some of their inspirations and apply it to whatever I'm doing at the time.
Yeah, the I do the same thing. I What got me into podcasts was the Joe Rogan experience. I think I can't remember exactly which one I watched, but at my last job, one of my coworkers was talking about this book. It's called "Becoming a Supple Leopard" by Dr. Kelly Starrett and Glenn Cordoza. Anyway, it's like a postural book that shows you what exercises you can do for different parts of your body. So this guy at work, he just talked about it, and over a few months, and he would do some stretches at work. And one day I just YouTubed that, and it turned out the authors were on the Joe Rogan Experience, so I was just listening in. And right now I'm using that book to hold this laptop up to get it higher. So um, anyway, that's the earliest I can remember. And then after that, I realized uh, random celebrities show up there, like Kevin Hart, the comedian's been on there. I have fighters, ultra marathon runners, uh, filmmakers, stuff like that. So that got me into that. And then, yeah, a lot of the guests have their own podcasts. So you just kind of branch off there. Like one,
Yeah, it's a good his podcast is a good diving board to get into other people's podcasts and see into and just discover new people. Yeah, he also, I like his interviewing style too, because he
yeah,
just comes across as like a dude, just
yeah,
like an average dude that's just hanging out with. He somehow always just seems like he's immediately friends with every host or every guest he has.
yeah.
And it's like I don't know how you can manage to do that, but he just seems like he's best friends with every guest, and so they just like chill and have such a good chat all the time.
Well, I've seen a lot of his episodes, so I know just by watching it, some of his guests he'll like go out to dinner the night before or something, or they'll uh, before they start recording, they'll have an extended chat. I think he shows them his studio. So there's a period of getting familiar even before you start recording, which is smart because when you start recording, you already have a base of like we kind of know each other. These are the boundaries we've established. It's a lot different doing it over Zoom. I mean, we kind of did the same thing, but I already know you, so it's pretty easy to just get the vibe right or familiar. Uh, yeah, you mentioned the 20,000 hertz podcast. I haven't heard it, but yeah, you have been into the audio game for forever. Back when you used to make beats, and I used to freestyle over your beats way back in first year. Are you still doing that, or you're just doing it now for filmmaking purposes?
I'm not making music as such anymore. I've been recently getting back into just playing guitar as a bit of a musical element to kind of escape just being at a computer and being on a camera all the time. It's just another creative outlet. But for the most part, I've kind of scratched that itch with filmmaking, because it's very similar in the sense that once you go out and shoot all of the material and you're bringing it into the edit, you're essentially crafting a story that someone can follow along with, and you're cutting music, and you're finding the pacing and where to build it up and where to let it drop. And it's a very similar workflow. And so I think that's what originally kind of hooked me about filmmaking is because I always had the music on the one end while, you know, I was at engineering school. Had the music on one end and then like the highly technical kind of engineering stuff on the other side. And that was kind of the two areas of my personality that I used to dabble with. And I was always trying to find a way to merge them.
Yeah.
And so for a while, I actually started getting into making synthesizers to merge the technical side with the music making side. Because there was a part of me that wanted to become, you know, like a DJ and go
Yeah.
tour and make my own music. I think deep down I knew that it probably wasn't going to happen unless I like went whole hog and really put everything into it. And so I didn't quite pursue that as intensely. So I was like, okay, I'll just try and find a way to make the engineering merge with that. But right now, yeah, I don't really feel the need to make music as much anymore just because filmmaking kind of scratches that same itch. And I actually find that I can get the emotional reaction that I was always trying to make people have with music. I find I can almost tap into that easier with filmmaking because there's the visual component as on top of the music, and rather than sitting down and trying to really make some kind of melody that connects with me, I can find music that connects with me and then structure my visuals to be one kind of cohesive package. And I just get a lot of enjoyment out of that, and less so out of the idea of actually composing the music now.
Hey, I saw one of your films, The Ultimate Hikes. So yeah, it's very cinematic. That's I'll tell you that. I mean,
Oh, thanks, man.
um, like for it is a long advertisement. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's more of like a brand film. So there's sort of multiple types of advertising brands are doing these days. And one of them is, you know, you still have your classic 15, 30-second ads that you see either on TV or before YouTube videos and stuff like that. But there's this big trend now where brands want to, it's almost like you want to entertain the viewer first, and then as a secondary byproduct, you know, pitch your brand, pitch your idea to your audience. So that was one of those films where I think it's just under 3 minutes, and it's more of that brand film where it's just an entertaining film, and then at the end of it, you know, the Ultimate Hikes logo comes up, and you almost don't even fully realize it's an ad until you're done watching it. So that's kind of the trend in marketing these days.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I really liked how you know the like you had the narration by the tour guide, um, and then you had clips of the tour guide and the guests that were taking the tour with him. But with those clips, those video clips, and also the audio narration, you threw in some landscape uh, video and audio. Like the one thing that I remember clearly is um, just the sound of like a trickling water over like some rocks or something. It's I don't know. I mean, I thought it was really cool. So for that 3 minutes or just under 3 minutes, like how much work goes into that? Because it seems like it looks like a part of a movie that I would see in theater. So, but I have no idea what goes into or how much effort goes into that.
Oh man, that's awesome. You're gonna make me blush, dude. I'm glad you liked the video that much. No, that's cool. I'm happy you noticed the sound too, because that was obviously, yeah, that's a big part for me, and so I'm happy that the subtlety of it didn't go fully unnoticed. Um, yeah, I mean it depends on the film. You know, a lot of the time it's harder the shorter it gets
Mhm.
because you're really precious about every little visual, every little sound that makes it in there. But it really also depends on how it was shot. Because if you go out and shoot a video with a script in mind and you're shooting certain scenes and you've storyboarded it, so you've kind of laid out the specific shots you want, when you get back into the edit, you know, the story's almost done for you already. And then as an editor, you're almost just piecing together what the original vision was. And obviously it changes and there's some tweaks you make along the way. Um, but for that Ultimate Hikes film, for example, we had an idea of the general story, but we went out on a hike for 5 days
Cool.
in the backcountry of New Zealand. Um, and we were filming for all 5 days. We had two cameras and a drone,
Mm.
so three of us filming. And so you get back into the editing suite after 5 days, and you know that's however many. I think it was probably like 2 terabytes of footage or something like that.
Oh wow.
So you get into the edit and it's a little intimidating at first because you're trying to figure out how to whittle down however many hours of footage into 3 minutes. But luckily with that one, we did have a little bit of the story going in.
Right.
And just to give you a bit of the backstory, I'm working for a company called Storyworks. I'm actually in the office right now, and my role on that project was, you know, cameraman on the actual shoot and then editor. But you know, we have a whole team, so there's three of us cameramen, and then we kind of had Josh, who is one of my bosses. He was kind of the on shoot director. So he's kind of the one thinking about all the footage we need, making sure that we're getting the shots we need. And then Holly, who is my other boss, Josh and Holly co-own Storyworks.
Okay.
She was kind of the overall. I don't even know what title you'd give her, but she's the producer slash kind of overall director, where she kind of came up with the idea for the script. So we scripted out that the narration, and she came up with kind of the idea for the flow of the story, and then she was helping me in the edit really get that story across as well. So she was kind of overseeing it. So having that helped a lot, and I would say so. We shot for 5 days, and then it probably took maybe 2 weeks to get to an initial rough cut. So that's just getting all the visuals, getting all the music in, having a rough play with the sound, throwing in some sound effects here and there, and just enough to send off to the client to get approval of like, hey, do you like the direction we're heading in?
Right.
And then from there, it's probably about maybe 3 more days doing the color grading and the sound mixing of it. So yeah, making the visuals pop, making sure all the colors match from scene to scene, making the image look as good as it can, and then also mixing in the sound, making sure the dialogue levels are correct versus the music versus the
Mhm.
sound effects. So that's usually like a day or two on color and then a day for sound is kind of roughly how long it takes for one of those videos.
Man, the matching colors is hard because I make like cooking videos with my mom. So she'll be cooking something. We'll just use a phone, uh, like a I have a Pixel or she has a Samsung. We'll use one of those, and it records in 1080. And then I'll go into iMovie, and then I'll just notice each purple looks different, and then you're just trying to adjust and match it manually, because if you do the auto filtering in the program, it just doesn't work. So you have to do it manually, but then you keep questioning, like, this looks a little bit off, but is it enough that someone will notice? And it's, I mean, it's just really annoying.
It, to be fair, it doesn't get easier.
Okay.
Like you get you get better and better at understanding why a certain clip looks weird when put next to another one. But I literally yesterday and the day before, I've been deep into the color grade of this music video we're working on right now. And yeah, I've gotten, significantly better at the color grading side of things, but it was funny because I spent however many hours yesterday working on it, and then at the end of the day I kind of just spat out a test render to show the guys in the office. And then we like flip off all the lights and make it feel like it's a bit of a movie theater in here, and we're watching it and I step back, and as soon as you step back you see all the little mistakes
Yeah.
because you're not, your eyes get so used to staring at certain clips that when you walk away and you go outside or you get a coffee and your eyes get a chance to readjust to something different, you come back and realize that everything's way too magenta, or everything, why is everything so yellow? And it's all these subtle little tweaks, but it's just insane how much the human eye can pick up on.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you were talking about your microphone before we started recording, and to your ears, you're sitting in a quiet room right now, but you
Yeah.
flip on the microphone and you can hear people doing dishes the
Yeah.
floor below. It's a similar thing where, yeah, we're just so perceptive on picking up on things that look off.
Mm.
And a lot of the battle with color grading and even sound as well is just over time you're kind of closing the gap between knowing that it looks or sounds weird and knowing why it looks or sounds weird. And
Mm.
just the more experience you get, the more you close that gap. But
Right.
the problem is the average person who's looking at your project, like they already have those senses.
Right.
Whether or not they can tell you why it looks weird is another story, but they can definitely go, "Oh yeah, that doesn't look natural. That looks weird." And so
Y-
it's just an endless battle of kind of tricking people into making it feel realistic.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said about watching the Ultimate Hikes video. I called it cinematic. I have no idea what that means. To me, that just means it's something I can see myself watching in the theater. I don't know why I think it's that way, but movies in theaters, they all have a certain kind of aesthetic that I have no idea how they came to that, but you can just tell like something's off, but I don't know what it is. Not with your video specifically, but generally speaking. Um, so yeah, it's weird because it really depends on the viewer. I put my these podcast episodes on YouTube, and the handful of people who watch it, they're not really watching; they're just listening. Maybe they'll have the video up, and they'll like come to the video if we say something interesting or I'm demonstrating something with my hands. So I don't really put too much time into coloring for these videos because it's not important. But yeah, for a brand video, that's that's exclusively the main focus, and then the audio and everything has to kind of support um, the whatever you're seeing to kind of keep you engaged.
Yeah, and it's amazing the more I dig into filmmaking, you realize that what we perceive as, quote, cinematic is by no means a representation of real life. Like
Yeah.
it's done in a way that it feels like it's real life, But when you start breaking it down, you know, for the Ultimate Hikes video, for example, it's like, you know, the forest didn't look that way. Like it didn't look that, you know, the way the light was hitting the leaves in this one particular shot wasn't necessarily like if you were to zoom out, the rest of the forest looks like that.
Mhm.
Or, you know, certain sounds, it's not like you could hear this amazing kind of swooping wind sound as you're standing on top of the mountain and there's nothing else that you're hearing. And you know, even in, you look at like car ads, for example, and if you close your eyes and listen to a car ad, the amount of random little like impact noises or like booms or swooshes that make no sense
Yeah.
out of context of the car commercial. Like it's not like the car actually sounds like that.
Right.
But when you're listening to it with the way the music's crescendoing and with the way, you know, the engine's roaring and the car's ripping by, it tricks your brain into feeling like it's real.
Hmm.
And so it's this whole, you're kind of dancing on this line between reality or real enough, but
Yeah.
make believe enough that it's entertaining. It's the same way that like a scripted story on Netflix, let's say, like a drama,
Yeah.
if it's based on reality, you know, they're kind of pulling the strings and, you know, tweaking this one part and putting a bit more, you know, tension into this one scene than there may have been in real life. You know, if you look at like a movie like The Social Network,
Mm.
I'm sure all those events happened, but, you know, whether or not they were actually that tense or whether or not that guy, you know, like threw a keyboard and stormed out of the room and, you know, in that exact sequence, probably not, but it's believable enough and it's entertaining enough that it keeps you engaged. So it's just, you're dancing on this line of trickery.
Yeah.
And the better you get at filmmaking, the more you can kind of stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. But then there's some movies obviously that go a little bit too far. You know, like some of the Hollywood big blockbuster, you know, Marvel movies, let's say, not to rip on them or anything, but they tend to, and they purposely go a little too
Yeah.
far. You know, they don't need it to be ultra believable.
Yeah.
So they're like a good example of movie making kind of taken to that next level where it's beyond reality, but
Yeah.
because you're invested so much in that you know, that character or that superhero's world, you don't really care as much. Whereas you probably wouldn't want to see that for something that's based more on real life.
Yeah. It's so cool that, you know, I thought about this quote unquote trickery um a lot because like even in the, like I said, the one thing that I can remember clearly from the Ultimate Hikes video is the water rippling on the rocks. I know I have actually heard that sound or similar sound in life. I've seen rocks, I've seen water flowing on them. So when I hear that on screen and see it, I go back, like it rings a bell. It's like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with that. I believe it. It's there's there's a gap that viewers are willing to accept from what they see and hear to their physical experience with the world. And then and then I love the Marvel movies because they're so ridiculous. Like, and I know going in there, I'm not looking for someone to give me an accurate um, uh, portrayal of how Iron Man would fly through the air. Because I mean, who has actually done that, right? So we want that. But yeah, man, it's crazy. It's really interesting. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I love the 20,000 Hertz podcast is because he'll break down things like that where, you know, he'll point out how sound in a movie, how many different sources the sound was actually constructed from to make this cohesive sound effect that when paired with visuals, you're not hearing the individual elements. It all just blends into something that your brain can latch onto, and it just brings you in a bit more. It makes the experience a bit more visceral and kind of skips that logic part of your brain and just
Yeah.
gets like right to like your core of your being. Like there was a really good example on that podcast which I just found so fascinating, and it was an interview with the lady who was in charge of the Game of Thrones dragon sounds.
Oh, okay.
And so she was talking about how they made the dragon sounds, and a huge element of it, you know, you had your synthesized sounds, and then they like tweak them like crazy and make them, you know, they're completely artificial sounds, but they would always layer in at least one animal sound
Mm,
somewhere in the mix.
yeah.
So the greatest example was she recorded her dog, and
Mm,
her dog was like sad and crying about something,
mhm.
like probably just food or something mundane. But she layered that in when the dragon was feeling sad.
Yeah.
And so there's this, even though you can't necessarily perceive just the sound of the dog within the layers of the sound, there's something connecting about hearing this like organic being feeling sadness. And so they notice just like layering that sound in, it just hits you in a different way, and you feel so much more empathy for what you're seeing on screen.
Yeah, the yeah, if you don't know the background about sounds and how they create a dragon whimpering sound, and someone tells you, man, that dragon really does sound like a dragon, you would think, what are you talking about? How do you know it sounds like a dragon? Dragons aren't real, bro. But yeah, that's the whole vibe. You're trying to make the story believable, but you're trying to make a dragon believable. So yeah, that trickery just, yeah, it's blowing my mind right now.
Yeah, like it's impressive that people can sit down and figure out what this make believe thing should sound like.
Yeah.
Another example that blew my mind. Do you ever watch Nerd Writer on YouTube?
Never heard of it.
Oh, he's pretty awesome. I think you'd dig him. He only puts out a video once a month now, I think. But he was kind of, I don't know if you've watched any like video essays on YouTube, but they're basically like 10 or 7 to 10 minute videos where they're just trying to prove some kind of point about something or make some connection between A and B. So he posts video essay style videos just about various things. Like he did, the one that blew my mind was he made one about how they came up with what magic would sound like in Harry Potter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That one's like really audio based, but he does a bunch of different ones. Like he'll do one about why like a certain, like why Jackson Pollock got so famous, and like what it was about like the timing of his art and the style of his art that just kind of collided at the right time. Or you know, how certain the filmmaking ones come to mind, but he covers all sorts of topics. He did one like how Trump answers a question, and he just broke down like every way that he answers and how he goes from getting posed a question versus ending up like way over in left field and not actually answering it, and how he uses the same, he like breaks it down from like a grammar perspective of like how he uses the same technique every time to just deflect.
Yeah.
And yeah, so anyways, he covers all kinds of topics, and the one that fascinated me was how they came up with the sound for magic. Because it's like you can imagine a room, you know, if you're if you're like editing a film and there's a bunch of dudes just doing this, like what what comes out of the wand sound wise, you know?
Yeah, I imagine
And
all the wizarding actors made their own sound like whoosh, pss.
yeah, it's funny to think about, or even like the Marvel movies. If you see like a BTS of, you
Yeah.
know, Iron Man, and it's just all green screen, and it's just like this dude in this suit just doing this, and nothing's happening, and it's just so lackluster. It's amazing. So I'd imagine there was a lot of that going on in the Harry Potter set. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
all that stuff that kind of I I still haven't let go of like how much sound fascinates me, and so I'm just trying to bring that back into filmmaking whenever I can.
Mm.
It's just yeah, it's that suspension of disbelief is kind of
Yeah.
what people call it, where you know it's not a fully believable scene, but as long as you can keep the audience
Yeah.
from having something that triggers the believability of the scene, then you're good. So if you can keep them in this heightened sense of reality, then they're along for the ride. But as soon as there's anything that's off just enough, then
Yeah.
they're out of it. It's like when you start noticing, especially as a filmmaker, when you start noticing how a film was shot and you start dissecting, oh, I wonder where they put that light, and you know that background element's really cool. As soon as you're in that mode, you know you've lost the story. You're out of the actual purpose of the movie, which was to just keep you on this roller coaster ride. And so
Uh,
anytime there's anything that's just out of place enough, then the viewer is just gonna be out of it like that.
well, I mean, I can think of a very specific example. I finished watching the Luke Cage series on Netflix a few weeks ago, and it was season two. Luke and Misty Knight, the detective or officer, I'm not sure what her title was in the show. They uh, they were going to, I think they were going somewhere together, and I don't remember the. So there was a cut. I don't remember what was before the cut, but after the cut was a view of a car coming toward the camera to show like the car is pulling up to the curb. But whatever was before it to that pull up, the cut was just so hard. It was like it was so jarring. I was like, "What?" I maybe that's just what I remember because that's the one scene in the whole second season, or the one cut where I can remember that because it was so unexpected.
Yeah, and it's amazing you all of a sudden realize that you're sitting on a couch watching TV at that point.
Yeah.
Like you kind of come to and you're like, oh man, I've been, especially if you've been binging a particular show and
Yeah.
there's something like that that's jarring, you're like, oh man, I should like go do something else now. You're just like
Yeah.
immediately back in your own reality. And it's yeah, you could shoot it perfectly. You could spend millions of dollars on budget, but there's so many little pieces that you know even a simple cut like that can just throw you out.
Well, see, that's the thing where I believe I'm a strange exception. If I decide to watch a show, let's say a season of a show, I want to get through it because I want to see the whole thing. Like there's a handful of times where I couldn't do that because I put myself through like 6 or 7 episodes, and it was just so terrible. I couldn't just keep coming back. Um, or it wasn't even terrible. I just didn't know why. I just couldn't go back to the next episode. So aside from some exceptions, I tend to watch a whole series because I'm interested in the story. It's like, where are they going to take this story? How are they going to go from point A to point B? But that's definitely not most people, because I think a lot of people just will stop as soon as their interest is not there. So I have no idea how to keep people's interest. Not that I'm making a show or anything, but yeah, like a example of a jarring scene. Yeah, that's definitely one way to lose your audience.
Yeah, and it always comes back to storytelling at the core. You know, even a podcast, for example, like the most memorable moments from podcasts are telling some kind of story that you can get into. Even yeah, another podcast that kind of sparked my interest in podcasts was Serial. I don't know. Did you ever listen to that podcast?
No, but my guess is it's about murders.
Uh, well, it's about one case in particular. So
Okay.
they kind of started the episodic style podcast.
Okay.
So they kind of they started that trend of like Netflix being on podcasts because
Mm.
what they did was they released a full season and it you know it had a start and an end. It was like 10 episodes or something like that.
Mm.
And it was following one particular case of a guy who was potentially uh, innocent when he, you know, was found guilty and put in jail. And so there was all these questions in the air about whether this guy was innocent or not. And it just follows that case from start to end. And I got so hooked on that podcast because it was like a TV show and it was telling a
Mm.
cohesive story and it was very much scripted and structured and yet you just wanted to keep coming back. And there's a whole slew of you know, true crime podcasts that follow this format now. And I got hooked on those a fair amount, at least up until the point where it started affecting my sleep. And I would be like freaked out by everything. Um, so I kind of had to like wean myself off of them after a little while because I got too into them. But it all just comes down to storytelling. And if you can, you know, twist and manipulate people's emotions throughout the whole thing enough that they're invested, then you know, like yourself, like they'll want to see it through to the end because they won't be
Right.
able. They feel like they have skin in the game. You know, they feel
Yeah.
it's like even if you get to like season 7 of a show, like I remember watching Dexter, and that show was great up until season 4, and then I think it went until like season 8, and I ended up just watching it because I'd spent so many hours with those characters that you kind of
Yeah.
feel like they're almost friends in a way or something. Like you feel invested in them. And even though it went completely downhill after that, like I needed to finish it and see it through to the end. So it's like you almost need to rope the viewer in so that they feel like something personal is at
Yeah.
stake. And
Yeah.
then they want to come back
I
and
have
finish the story
bad news for you. I think they're doing a reboot or
of
like
Dexter.
a continuation or something. Yeah.
Oh man, no. Did you watch Dexter?
I have never seen it. No. But
Okay, well, if you do,
yeah.
just watch to the end of season 4 and then just never touch it again.
Okay.
That's
That's
my
good to know.
advice.
Because
Yeah.
it's good to know ahead of time. If I already have an out, then I'll be like, all right, I know going into it, this I'm gonna end at this point. But I'm so deep into so many franchises, like The Walking Dead. It's coming up on season 11 soon. That's
Man, season
so many
11.
episodes. Yeah. Um, and I just have to watch it because of the sunk cost fallacy. It's like I've already put a lot of time into this. I gotta see it through.
That's what I admired about I really liked Breaking Bad because they set off from the beginning knowing that I don't know if they knew it was going to be 5 seasons exactly, but they knew that they wanted to do somewhere around like 4 or 5 seasons.
Yeah.
So they knew that they had a definitive end. And it wasn't like, I feel like some shows, they like peak and then have their resolution. And then there's just 4
Extra.
seasons of epilogue, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, no one, you know, no one needs to see this heroic character slowly degrading with the quality of the writing also degrading. It's
Yeah.
like you almost want to just see a strong finish and be sad that it's over,
Yeah.
but at least it feels like a complete series or a complete story rather than just like, and now we watch our hero fade into obscurity and he's just a normal dude now.
On today's
Yay.
episode, he didn't get the receipt at the grocery store. Watch him
How's
lose
he
his
going to pay
mind in
his
the car.
taxes?
Yeah. Man. But yeah. Well, like now that I've kind of started making, now that I have started making some form of video content, when I watch episodic shows like The Walking Dead or its spin-off show Fear the Walking Dead, each episode typically has a different director or they have a set of directors for the season. And with The Walking Dead, they have a follow-on show called Talking Dead, where you have a host and they talk about the episodes. They bring in directors and writers and actors, and they kind of tell you how they filmed the scene or interesting things. So from that perspective, I like that because you get the story you want in one episode, and each episode has its own arc, but it also has to fit into the whole season and also into the whole universe of the show. And with each different director, episodes are kind of different and how they're shot. I don't know enough to tell you what those differences are, but in some episodes, I can clearly see this vibe is way different. Like you'll have one episode of The Walking Dead, it'll just be all in the forest, and like it's kind of hard to hear because I'm guessing they had to cut out so much background noise, and they probably had, I don't know, some audio stuff to deal with. And other episodes are just inside, so it's just a whole different vibe. So I really enjoy that. um but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it keeps it interesting, I suppose. I'd imagine it's got to be tough though, working on a show like that where the creative lead is changing so much because you know the director's got to be the captain of the ship, and you know their word is the final word. And I know that like on a lot of the longer running TV shows like Walking Dead, Dexter, um, yeah, any show like that, eventually cast also start directing. And you
Yeah.
know, being an actor, I mean, some actors can make directing work if they're like really passionate for directing, but I have a feeling being an actor doesn't necessarily prepare you to be a team lead and be a director, and there's so much nuance with that role that
Mm.
sometimes that I would imagine creates like a weird dynamic. And then also like directing when you're in also on camera as well. I don't know how people could do that. Like that's so much to keep in your head at one time
Yeah.
to be able to then hop into the role of the character. Actors are insane. I mean, the more I get into filmmaking, the more I realize how much talent there is and how much skill there is in acting to just be able to flip that switch and just embody a completely different person all of a sudden.
Yeah, I don't have personal experience, but just from hearing actors give dialogues, if I hadn't thought twice about it, I wouldn't be impressed because, one moment they're angry, next moment they're calm, then the next moment they're trying to stop a fight or something. If you don't think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that's just the story. That's how it goes. The guy got angry because someone punched him, and then he's trying to calm somebody down because he doesn't want to escalate the fight. But then you try modulating your own voice to go from 0 to 100. You're like, what the what? How are you doing this? Because just from the audio perspective, it's like some sounds come like from way deep, like especially like guttural sounds or what is the word? Like maniacal laughter or uncontrollable laughter. I don't know if I could ever simulate laughter to the point where it sounds natural, but it does.
Yeah, like Joker's laugh. Like, how do you do that? It's
Yeah.
like insane. Yeah. I'm assuming you've seen the new Joker, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, the high pitched like
Yeah, yeah. Apparently he spent, I think it was like months perfecting that laugh. And like they actually, apparently it's a real condition too. And they, like he went and met up with people who have that condition, and the amount of prep work to figure out who that character is
Mhm.
and to embody them. I mean, even in the Dark Knight, like I'm pretty sure that literally drove Heath Ledger, insane. Tried to be the Joker.
Yeah, but that performance, I've seen that movie at least 3 or 4 times, and I never get
So
bored of
good.
watching him. Like
It's so good.
his
It's got to be one
Joker,
of my favorite movies.
yeah. I, but isn't it so weird? You have actors who go through such great lengths to control their voice and their even how you kind of walk or how you interact with people. But outside of that profession, is it really useful? I mean, I can't see where I would find it if I'm at the grocery store and I'm trying to check out and the cashier is being rude. Am I really going to just raise my voice and just try to like scare them, or I don't know. I'm just asking. I have no idea. I'm not trying to make a point, but is it actually useful?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's if you put it into everyday context, it's kind of messed up. Like to be able to manipulate your own emotions and other people's emotions to that degree is like outside of an artistic medium is super weird. But I guess that's kind of like most art, if you
Yeah.
if you look at the way someone pours their emotion into their paintings, let's say,
Mm.
like if they put that level of quite like pretty much insanity into like something else in their life, you know, it doesn't blend. I think that's why you just see so many creatives that the further they get into their craft, the more detached they get from their own emotional realities. And then there's this disconnect of like the world in which they're creating and like the real world. And you get a lot of like mental health problems and things like that. And it's no surprise. Like there's so much emotion involved and so much at risk of sounding like cheesy, but there's a lot of vulnerability in putting out, artistic expression
Yeah.
of any kind, whether it's, filming videos in your home or making podcasts or, being an actor. Like there's an element of like, hey, I worked really hard to make this for you, and to like put a little baby hatchling out into the world and it just gets like slaughtered by the public can be can be really really hard on the soul. And even when it does go well, you're you're happy for the praise, but then you don't want to let it go to your head either. So like whether it goes well or doesn't, you're always still just wrapped up in your own little world, and it means something different to you than it does to the public. And when not that I'm putting any films out that I have like really poured like my absolute, soul into. But I would imagine if you're someone who's written a script and you've seen it through from like script writing to directing to turning it into a movie, so much of like those 2, 3, 5 years of your life have been put into that. And so you're just like putting it out into the world and just hoping that, people enjoy it. It's like a really vulnerable experience. And so I have so much respect for actors and people who, well, really anyone who's starting anything creative, because especially when you're starting out too, you want it to be good so bad. Like
Mm.
you want more than anything for it to just get better and better and better. And there's this podcast host, Ira Glass, who hosts This American Life. And he has this really famous snippet from some interview a while back. And he basically said, when you start off, your taste is really good. What you enjoy and what you find moving and what art speaks to you, that's bang on, that you have killer taste when you start, but your skills start down here. And,
Yeah.
you want to be making this quality because that's the quality that you see and enjoy. But for a while, your quality is just down here. And it's just about closing that gap, but you're beating yourself up along the way because you want it to be
Yeah.
that quality, but it's just not quite there yet. And so you kind of go through this weird emotional struggle where you're putting, with each new thing, you're putting that much more effort into it and you want it to be that much better, but it's not improving as quick as you want. And you see that, you send it to friends and they're like, yeah, this is cool. And you're like, dang it, I tried so hard on this. Like, I want you guys to enjoy it more. Please enjoy it more. And yeah, it's a little heartbreaking at first. I think I went through that a little bit
Mhm.
when I was making music back in university, where I wanted it to be so much better than it actually was, and I felt like I was putting a lot of emotional effort into it. And then understandably, you show it to friends and it's just not quite at that level yet. So they're, everyone's supportive, don't get me wrong. Like, everyone's super nice about it, and I never had anyone, you know, straight
Yeah.
up tell me what I was doing was bad. But you still can sense it. You can still sense when like a friend's just being supportive for the sake of being supportive. So it's like the beginning stages of being a creative are often the hardest ones. That's where you go through the most strife.
Yeah. By the way, I just changed my headphones because my wireless earbuds died. So I don't know. Just thought I'd say that.
It's all good. You didn't miss much. I was just rambling on a bit.
No, I heard most of it. I think I missed like a couple seconds, but um, yeah. The as for creating stuff, like specifically for me, I mean, I know like in high school and even in university, I was just trying really hard to you know do well in school. I really believe that I really need to study this material and understand it really well to succeed in engineering. And the longer and longer you go into the program, and the less and less you actually use it, it just gets really discouraging because you learn a lot. Specifically for me in my electrical engineering degree, you learn a lot of different topics from control systems to embedded systems, programming, high voltage power, all these things. But you're gonna end up in one area. So I understood generally that they're teaching you this to get you an idea of what the engineering field will be like, but it just takes a lot. Like as I got more and more into the program, it just became harder to convince myself this is important. And anyway, I don't know how I got onto there, but as specifically for like doing this podcast, trying to get praise from people, uh, I'm not really looking for praise for this. Although when it does come, it's nice. But I just think of it as this is just something I'm doing now. I'm just gonna put in the reps. Basically, it's like you're kind of working out. You start working out. You're just going in every day. You're lifting the weights you need to lift, and if you just keep showing up every day, eventually you're gonna reach a point where you'll look back and be like, oh wow, I uh, I did increase my skills to get closer to my taste. But I know what you're saying. I think I'm not expressing it well. Like the pressure to do really well uh, gets you to those heights that you want to match your tastes. But I think I've just tried that so much, and it's just I've always been so disappointed, and maybe my goals were too high. That now I've kind of reverted. I've changed the model to I'm just gonna show up. I'm just gonna do this and put it the reps in, and if that's basically all I can do. And if the success comes, that's great. But otherwise, if I find value in doing it, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, that's definitely that's awesome to hear because that's the healthy mindset to go in with. And it took me a while to get to that point. I feel like only in the past, I don't know, maybe a couple years, I've realized that same thing where yeah, you just have to. I mean, people always say that just focus on getting value out of the process of doing it rather than the outcome of doing it. And you hear that all the time. But it took me a little while to actually internalize that and
Mm.
to really believe in just showing up every day and looking at the incremental improvements
Yeah.
as, good enough, and that over time I'll get to the place I want to be. But yeah, I always experienced a bit of this dilemma or back and forth in my brain where I think a certain level of impatience and I guess drive because of that impatience
Mhm.
is what also helps me get to places. So there's a part of me that doesn't want to lose that edge, even though I know from a logical standpoint that that isn't healthy for me.
Mm.
So it's almost like keeping these two views in mind where it's like, yeah, the process is everything and showing up every day is the important part.
Yeah.
And that's what's eventually going to get me places. But it's this kind of internal impatience that drives me to want to put in the reps
Yeah.
because I do want to get better. But it's balancing the two that's the tricky part and not letting one take over.
Yeah. The I definitely agree. The if you ask most people what they uh like, if you ask them how is your life, they'll generally say, this is going well, this is not going well, I want to do better here. um so generally the idea is you want to live your life, you want to live a balanced life. But if that's your goal, like, you're never going to reach those heights because um people excel with some kind of stress. How much you can handle is dependent person to person. But if you're not reaching for heights that you haven't ever reached before, first of all, you'll never get there. And the people who reach those heights, they're I wouldn't say they're balanced. Like the best of the best of the best are not balanced people. Like you need some kind of insane drive and ability mm, uh, to be awesome, like to be the best at what you do. But with that being said, yeah, it's like the balance is tough because it's like stress will either make you really creative and do really amazing things, or it will just have the opposite effect. But I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I can't do that because for me, it's like a flip of a coin. I could I'm not ready to put myself through extreme stress just to achieve a goal, which is what I did do throughout university. It's like I'm gonna do well. So you know you sleep like 5 6 hours a night. By Fridays, you're barely awake in class, and the weekends you're basically putting in a whole day of work on weekends because you gotta do labs and stuff. So I just had so much of that. I think that experience really colored how I approach things. So I mean, it's tough because I feel like I know I can't be super amazing because I'm just not willing to go through so much, uh, so much. I don't know how to say it. Like,
Turmoil
yeah,
and just that much dedication and
well,
stress
it's
and
like,
sacrifice, I guess it would be the word.
yeah, it's like to achieve a goal, you got to put a lot into it, but it always comes at a cost. And I don't know if I'm ready for that cost, or at least I'll say I'm a bit smarter about it. Like, I know, like, oh, all right. So, trying to think of an example. Yeah, last year I ran a 10K, um, just for myself,
Nice.
and I built up to it, over a few months. Started with 1 or 2 kilometers, up to 5, 7, 8, 9, and then one day I was like, all right, I'm doing the 10K. So that was all planned. The prep was there, and that day, I was limping for the last few kilometers, but I'd already decided I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna get it done. Whatever the cost is, I'll deal with it later. But I had an idea. Like, I already had a recovery routine. I already knew I'm gonna take a hot bath. I'm gonna do some icing. I'm gonna massage with some oil. Um, so yeah, I don't know. You learn. You get
Was
older. You learn.
there a moment, cuz yeah, I remember in university, yeah, it was a bit of a pressure cooker, and I remember you being super diligent and working crazy hard. And I was always I was envious of like how well you at that age
Mm,
you could like sit down and just do the work that you knew you had to do.
yeah,
Because I definitely did not have that.
yeah.
Was there a moment that you felt like that switch sort of flipped where you go from wanting the best, absolute best possible outcome and being the best at whatever you're doing
Mm,
to then reining it in and being like, you know what, I think I want balance rather than being the best. Like,
mm,
was there a point what for you, let's say professionally,
mm.
where you could say to yourself, this is good enough and I don't need to like I'll keep getting better and I'll strive to get better, but like this amount of effort put into that category of my life is enough. Because I found that I've always struggled with that, and on paper I understand that balance is important,
Mhm.
but it's really the other people in my life
Mm.
that I bring into my life that kind of enforce balance, whether
Right.
I like to or not, because my brain will just go off on a tangent and I'll just live in my own little world until, my fiance is like, hey, let's go out for dinner tonight. Or, my friends are like, hey, we should hang out. And that way I'm like kind of forced to tap back into reality
Yeah.
and like, rein it in. Was there anything like that for you? Like, does your brain immediately go to that place of like, I need to be the best? Or do you feel like you now have a bit of a healthier internal dialogue?
Well, from growing up, when you're young, being the best is like, I can definitely be the best. I just have to just put a lot into it. So I don't know if there was a switch, but I could kind of map the timeline of, I think it's just repeated failure. It's like, I want to be the best. Like when I was 8 years old, you know, that was my first year in Canada. And even when I was younger than that, I'd won some kind of sprinting race, and I was like, I'm fast, I'm fast, I'm fast. So you come to Canada, And in gym class you have sprints, and you're like, okay, I'm not the fastest, but I came in second, I'm second fastest. And then in grade 4 you're like, all right, I'm like fourth fastest. And then in grade 5 you're like, all right, I'm going to switch to long jump. And you're like, all right, I came in sixth. And then next year, like, okay, well, I'm not good at long jump anymore. So you just keep trying to switch to basketball, and then you don't make the basketball team for 3 different years, and then you just feel terrible. So it was just like repeated failures that it really bothered me. But I mean, I guess, yeah. And then going into grade 9, I remember my dad said, "Oh, high school is different. You're gonna have to put in the work. You're gonna have to work harder." So I took it to heart. Starting from grade 9, I was for the first few months, I was like, I had a schedule. I'd come home, I'd study science for 2 hours, I'd do the homework, I'd do this, and then I can watch Dragon Ball Z at 8 o'clock and eat dinner and do that. So I kind of followed through with that. Then I slowly figured out, well, I don't have to put in this much effort. I can kind of dial it down a bit. But then you have friends who are like top 3 in the class getting like 95, 96, 97% averages. So one semester I was like, all right, I'm going to beat my friend. I'm going to get a 95 average. I'm going to work as hard as possible. So I did that. And then I ended up with like a 92. And I was so upset. I was like, how is it possible that I can commit to a goal and put my all and I can't reach it? So that kind of taught me, you know, goals are great, but what's the purpose of the goal? My purpose to trying to beat my friend was I want to be better than him. But what is that? Is that useful personally? It's like, well, no. I mean, like grades get you into university, and that dude was going into medicine, and I was going into engineering. So then you get some perspective. It's like, okay, well, whatever. So it was just repeated cycles of this is the goal, I'm going to do this. Then you just fail short of it. Then you just keep doing that. And I remember on graduation day uh, at Waterloo, it was weird. I was telling somebody, I was like, I don't know if I feel proud about this. It's like, you want to do really well and you want to get your degree. um, but my goal was always I want to learn what is engineering. I actually got into it because I was like, oh, it sounds tough. Obviously it's more than I bargained for. So anyway, I was telling somebody at the graduation, it's like I felt way prouder of my grade 10 art project than like getting my engineering degree, because it was like a creative thing. You had to draw it, you had to paint it. It was like a different vibe. But now looking back on it, I can say that um, obviously I'm proud of getting the degree, because a handful of uh, like a very small percentage of people even have an engineering degree. So I'm very grateful to that. But to answer your question directly, what switch there was that allowed me to not to be the best was, I think over time I realized uh, being the best at something is only useful if it provides something for you and um, your family, I guess. Like being the best at all these different things, well, I couldn't achieve on some level. Like, and when I did, I guess I never really achieved any of being the best. Um,
I mean, I wouldn't say that, but like, I mean, you had an insane ambition, and
yeah,
whether or not you achieved your specific goals, because no one ever does, because
yeah,
you set them just out of reach of your own ambition.
yeah,
But it definitely takes a maturing to go from not even like necessarily like just needing to be the best, but to go from always trying to be the absolute best you possibly can be to, okay, I'm happy with this amount of effort I'm putting into this, and I want to balance it out with
well, yeah,
family and friends.
that's that's a better way to put it. Instead of trying to be the best at everything, I just decided, or not, it wasn't like an instant, but over time I realized all I can really do is um, show up and put in my best effort every day. And that much I know I can control. And what comes of it, let it come. If nothing comes of it, at least I know I'll never look back and say I should have tried harder there, or I you know, yeah.
Yeah, do you look back at your insane 92% average and go, man, I wish I had that 3% more? My life would be so much better now.
No, but I do remember my grade 12 functions exam where I got a 99.5%, and I didn't get that 0.5%. That's what I remember.
Oh man, it's an endless battle, isn't it?
But it's like those are the things that drive you. I think you have to have failures. Like you don't value success unless you fail, and you don't like I wouldn't change anything, I guess, because you know whatever sacrifice you put, whatever consequences you get, that's what shapes you to who you are now. And if you don't acknowledge those, or you pretend like they're not important, it's I don't know. I just feel like it's just like acknowledging a part of your life didn't happen, basically.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel the same way about, obviously I'm not doing engineering work anymore.
Mm.
Some of it transfers a little bit just as far as knowing kind of the science of how these cameras operate and how to get the best image out of them and that kind of stuff. But obviously, I'm not in an engineering role anymore. But at the same time, I don't regret doing an engineering degree.
Yeah.
And looking back, I'd do it again because it's that same notion of like I probably wouldn't be here if I didn't go through that phase of discovery.
Yeah.
Very expensive discovery, but
Oh
discovery
yeah.
nonetheless.
Yeah, dude.
um, but I wouldn't have gone through working at a startup and getting burnt out and
Mm-hmm.
then deciding to switch gears into filmmaking, and I wouldn't have discovered that whole process.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be where I am without doing that. So yeah, it's interesting how you kind of they feel like such failures at the time, and
Yeah.
you beat yourself up, but when you look back, it's just a different path, really. It's just kind of I almost feel like it's your brain knowing ahead of time that it's not the right path for you, but like consciously you need something that's jarring enough to actually internalize it. It's like I
Yeah.
I think I kind of knew that though I love engineering and though I love problem solving and everything that comes with it,
Mm.
I think somewhere deep down my brain kind of knew that it wasn't the fulfilling path for me in the end,
Mm.
and that I would need to eventually switch things up. But it took working for a startup, becoming incredibly burnt out, and the startup going bankrupt for my brain to be like, maybe this isn't the lifestyle I want to live. Maybe this isn't the path that's right for us.
Yeah.
But I think having, the music as the side hobby and all these different side interests outside of engineering, somewhere in my subconscious, I truly believe that my brain kind of knew, yeah, we'll let him dabble in this for a while, but, eventually he's got to find his way back to what he actually wants to do. And
Yeah.
I think failure is kind of what triggers that.
Well, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it's always clear, like, yeah, I wasn't really into this or that. And you kind of look back at it and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that kind of led me to where I am. But it's, I don't know, like, whenever you talk about it or people talk about it, it's always in a in a way that it's you're explaining something that you know to be true after the fact. But when you're going through it, it's like you got to work some shit out before you figure things out. And sometimes working some shit out has like an $80,000 tag on it, like a engineering degree, which is crazy. But that's just the truth. It's I mean, for me, I'm still into it, so it's all good for now. But it's great that you got something out of it, and I think like whoever is driven is never satisfied, and they're always looking for new things to do. Um, as you age and the conditions around you, like where you live, who you're with, they will kind of define your boundaries of what you can and cannot do over time, which is just a part of life. Um, but yeah, like you just you're always trying to push your boundaries, and sometimes they push back, but never pushing the boundaries seems like it would just be a sad reality.
Yeah, yeah, I would have to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just, I don't know, it's just like a way of staying entertained, I think.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that's why, you started making little films and,
Yeah.
started this podcast and stuff like that. It's like your brain just needs something to latch onto. And I'm also a really firm believer in no skill acquisition is a waste of time,
Mm.
because any skills you gain have their way of working themselves back into what you're doing
Yeah.
at any given moment. So me doing engineering for a while, now that I'm in filmmaking, we had one of our gimbals break down,
Mm.
and it stopped working. And with my electronics background, I was able to just pop it open and figure out what was broken and solder it back together. And
Damn.
we didn't have to pay however many dollars to get it fixed. And so things like that, like they just, you never know when you're going to be using those skills that you acquired, and you don't know. Yeah, you just have no idea how they're going to be integrated back into whatever you're currently doing. Even making music,
Mm.
I had a bit of a stretch goal of pursuing that as like a career, but it didn't pan out really. But because I spent 4 or 5 years just making music in my bedroom, I got really used to laying out my ideas, sequencing my ideas, cutting them, figuring out kind of emotional ups and downs. Then I went into, the engineering side of things. Didn't use any of my musical knowledge really then.
Mm.
But now that I've gone into filmmaking, it gave me a leg up when it came to editing,
Mm.
because I already was familiar with chopping up timelines. I was familiar with kind of the emotional ebb and flow. But like when I was making music,
Yeah.
I didn't even think about picking up a camera. Like
Right.
that was nowhere in my brain. I even barely took photos on my phone. Like just nothing about like the audio visual world interests me at the time. It was just audio and it was just engineering. But those skills that I acquired in both of those
Mm.
fully inform the work I do in filmmaking now. So that's kind of been reassurance that like whatever little side tangent I'm going off on, if I want to spend a weekend digging into how soil health affects our well-being,
Yeah.
I'm convinced that in some way that's going to make itself back into my life and help me somehow.
Yeah.
So I think it's just constantly having that curiosity that just keeps you entertained.
Yeah.
I think that's at the core of it, is like you want to have balance with the people in your life, and all these different aspects of your life. But I think ultimately you need to have things that you need to have like unsolved questions,
Yes. Yes.
and you need to have that curiosity of like, what's the next thing that I can learn? What's the next thing that I don't need to be the best, but what's the next thing that I can better myself at?
Yeah.
Even if I want to take like a Saturday learning a card trick, like a magic trick, I don't know. then I can like impress someone at some party at some point, and who knows, maybe they know someone who's made this film, and now I've made a connection because I can magically make the ace of spades pop to the top of the deck. You know, you just never know, and I
Yeah.
think that's what's so entertaining and what gets me so excited about just learning new things is that the universe has, not to sound all like woo woo and like hippie,
Ah,
but
bro, it's all good.
the universe has a way of rewarding you for efforts that you've put into other things.
Yeah, if you talk to me long enough, we're gonna get to woo woo. It's just inevitable.
I like it. You'd love the Rich Roll podcast then.
All
You should
right.
definitely check it
How are
out.
we doing for time?
I should probably head out in the next 5 minutes, maybe. There might be people starting to roll into the office.
All right.
So
Well, we can
if
just wrap up,
there's,
I guess. Yeah, thanks for chatting. I really enjoyed it. I think like you're obviously you express your ideas clearly. So if you were interested in doing your own podcast or guesting on others, it's definitely worth pursuing. Uh, so there's
thanks,
that.
man. I appreciate that.
And so what you mentioned you're doing a music video. Do you have any other projects going on?
Yeah, there's one pretty gnarly project that's coming up, and basically, there's these slackliners in town. Are you familiar with slacklining?
No.
So it's basically like the new form of tightrope walking,
Oh.
but the difference is it's not like a really rigid, super taut rope. It's essentially like a ratchet strap that's about like two inches thick,
Okay.
and you usually set it up between like two trees, and you like walk along it, and it's really slack, so it like sags as you walk along it. And it's just like this little adventure hobby that people do.
Yeah.
But in recent years, there's been this trend that's called highlining,
Mhm.
and it's basically setting up a slack line, but between like a chasm on
Oh.
like a mountain or like above
Oh.
a river or something like that.
No.
So you're like however many meters above, and you're harnessed in
Yeah.
for the most part. So if you fall, you know you're caught by your harness.
Oh, okay.
But there's these guys in town because Queenstown in New Zealand, where I live right now, it's kind of like the adventure capital of New Zealand.
Mm.
So it brings all sorts of crazy people. You'll meet Joe Schmo in the street who's actually like this world famous mountain biker who can just throw like double backflips on jumps and stuff like that. Like everyone's mental here. These guys are like this small group of 5 highliners, and they have this objective. There's these 2 peaks that are right next to Queenstown
Mhm.
on the Remarkable Mountains, they're called, and they basically want to set up the highest altitude high line in Australasia,
Okay.
and they're basically setting it up between these 2 mountain peaks.
Mhm.
And we're making a documentary about it. So we're going to follow their process and be with them while they set up this insane high line that's like, the altitude of it is like 3,000 feet or something like that.
I
And
am
the
so
length
scared.
the length of it is like almost 200 meters across these 2 mountain peaks, and the drop below them is something like 100 meters or something insane like that. And yeah, we're gonna climb up the mountain with them, get a bunch of drones, and film people highlining. So that's a passion project that we're working on, and yeah, we're set to shoot it in the next month or so.
Well,
So that's gonna be insane.
whenever like whenever you guys get done with that, I'd love to see it. And I'm scared already, but we'll see what happens. So your website is Johansson. Am I pronouncing it right? Johansson or Johansson?
I mean, technically, it's like Johansson if you want to get the Swedish pronunciation.
Okay.
Not that, I mean, that's a butcher pronunciation. I just go by Johansson, so it's johanssonfilms.com,
Yeah.
and my Instagram is at johansson.films.
Well,
And then if you want to check out the company that I work for, Storyworks New Zealand, yeah, check them out.
Yeah.
They do awesome work.
I'll put
So
those links in the YouTube video. I mean, for now, you're probably looking at like a handful of people watching this, but you never know. Could be more. Um,
hey everyone,
uh,
thanks for the publicity. I appreciate it.
um, yeah. Okay. So let me just hit stop.